Hey, this is Dominic, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominic and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Brian. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
There comes a time in every man's life where he gets hit by the metaphorical Mack truck. For example, a global pandemic wipes out your savings or your business. You unexpectedly lose the job that your identity is wrapped up in. An infidelity in your relationship is exposed. Your child has a mental health crisis. You did something unforgivable while you were in a rage or had too much to drink. You have a terrifying medical health diagnosis. Or you mistakenly send an email to 300 of your corporate clients about a podcast you recorded on pornography, like I did, and you lose all 300 of those corporate clients, like I did over a year ago. Now, these Mack Truck moments can either flatten you or they can be opportunities to discover a new level of strength and unshakable confidence within you. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about the elements of how to cultivate warrior level resiliency, why these Mack Truck moments are often a compass to finding your best self in disguise, and why finding meaning in your suffering is essential to building warrior level resiliency. So enjoy this conversation where I share a big part of my journey over this past year on how I cultivated warrior level resiliency.
Let's talk catastrophes. Those moments that just...
Oh, you mean those Mack Truck moments where life just runs you over with an 18-wheeler?
It's the moment where people ask you the question, like, when did your life change? It's usually those moments, those Mack Truck moments that really provide a point of reflection.
Yeah, you and I always talk about how when we're drifting in life tends to give you 1 to 3 signals, 1 to 3 wake-up calls. There's that really gentle feather brush across your neck that you usually end up ignoring. It's kind of like the feather or the tap on the shoulder. Then there's the 2x4 over the forehead. And sometimes we listen to those, sometimes we ignore those. And then the Mack Truck comes for you. And it just absolutely annihilates you. It's a catastrophe. And today we're here to talk about, like, how do you get up from those Mack Truck moments? Most guys just kind of pick themselves up and their guts are dragging behind them and they just go on living life that way. And we're talking about today a better way of doing that.
And I think it's important to note that there's 2 things about the Mack Truck. One, it hurts, right? If you get hit by a Mack Truck, so there's collateral damage, internal bleeding. There's usually some sort of repercussion that happens when a Mack Truck hits you.
Flush wound.
So that's 1. And 2 is that it's slower, right? Like, it's not often, and thank God for it, that you get hit by a Mack Truck, even though we tend to listen to those moments. And so part of it doing it better is, like, what else can we listen to besides just the Mack Truck that, 1, hurts, and 2, takes some time.
That's right. And even still, life will run you over from time to time. I personally have a pretty long and winding story that I think can start to illuminate for anybody who's been in a situation where you've just felt like life threw you something that was bigger than what you could handle, and how to find a deeper sense of resiliency, like how to dance with those moments, how to grieve in those moments, how to pick yourself back in those moments, how to come out stronger on the other side from those moments. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Well, good, because we have a 1-year anniversary coming up. And this is a 1-year anniversary that not many people have at all, but it is your 1-year anniversary.
This may be unique to me. The day that this episode is airing is the 1-year anniversary of what we affectionately refer to in this community as Porngate.
And for those that have been listening but haven't heard of Porngate yet, tell us what happened.
Okay. The punchline of Porngate is that on this day 1 year ago, I inadvertently sent out an email to 300 of my corporate clients, which represented pretty much 100% of my revenue in my business, mistakenly sent 300 of my corporate clients an email about how to make better choices around your porn consumption.
Right. Something that usually the spam filters would catch, but in this case, you were already behind the firewall.
No, yeah, like for whatever reason, like all the spam filters did not were relaxed on that particular day and they all made their way through. So let me provide the context here. Okay. So a year ago at this time, I had two parts of my business. The one that paid the bills, which was my keynote speaking and corporate training. I spent 15 years in financial services. That was where my network was. That was my bread and butter. And I was just in the process of releasing my second book, On Purpose Leadership, which was really geared towards starting, a year's worth of keynote speeches on corporate stages, doing corporate training programs around this book, On Purpose Leadership, which was a disaster in and of itself. I'll get into that in a moment. That was one world, had its own email distribution list, had its own marketing. And then there was this other part of the world that was my most passionate part, which is the work we do around MET, right? This podcast, which we've been running for years, the in-person immersions, the workshops, the retreats, the masterminds. But that was really in its infancy. And that wasn't making much money, maybe like 5 to 10% of my income. And that was church and state. Never the two of those shall meet. Until Monday, September 28th, I am at the gym working out when all of a sudden my phone starts blowing up, Bri. I'm getting text messages, phone calls, emails, and DMs on all my social media platforms from my corporate clients like, hey man, did your email get hacked? Because I have an email in my inbox that says 4 feel-good porn alternatives, which was an episode that you and I had done on this podcast, right?
Yeah, just really quick. Was there any part of you in that moment of panic at the gym, was there any moment of you that felt like, yes, as a matter of fact, my email did get hacked?
I like to take that escape code. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Oh man. Okay. Continue.
Actually, let me give you that moment. Actually, it's a great question because in that moment, I remember exactly where I was at the gym. I remember exactly what weights I was using. These are like the moments you just don't forget where you were. And I put down the weights. I could feel the surge of panic, like come up through my stomach into my chest. And as soon as it hit like my neck level, I shoved it down because I went boom, right into crisis mode, right? It was like, don't feel this, deal with this situation.
Deal with it, right?
Yeah, deal with it. And in that moment, there was the, holy shit, I should tell them like, yeah, my email got hacked. Like this wasn't me. I should.
Except that my face is on the email. It's the same writing style.
It's the same writing style. It's pointing to the podcast. Yeah.
It was a very sophisticated hack job on me. And somebody very good is doing this.
Someone was playing the long game. Yeah. And what that podcast was about was really trying to speak to men who, the majority of our listeners watch porn. There's like a darkness to it, right? It happens in shadows. Guys feel guilty or shameful or remorseful with their relationship with porn. And this was really about how to look at your porn usage in a different way. And here are 4 alternatives to watching what you're watching to feel better about it. So this episode was only supposed to go to the men on our email list that have nothing to do with the corporate world. But here's the weird thing that happened, Bri. The 1 week of that entire year that Callie Simon, who's my chief operating officer, takes a vacation. She took a vacation on that week. She's the one who sends out all the emails to the distribution list. That was the one day that it was my job to go in to the email server and to press send on that email. So check this out. I go in earlier that morning and I look at the email that's scheduled to send, and I'm about to hit the send button, but I notice that the distribution list seems like it's 300 people more than our typical number. And I'm like, that's curious. Why are there 300 more people on our distribution list than normal? Fuck it. I said, fuck it. Instead of looking into it, I'm just like, fuck it. And I press send.
Maybe we're doing great. Maybe a lot of inbounds.
Yeah. But I remember that moment where I could have gone, and I literally said, fuck it. And I hit send. And it turns out those 300 were my corporate clients, including the largest women's run organization in the financial services space. It took me 2 years to build rapport. It's basically like women who represent the top 75 firms in the financial services industry. I was their one guy that they allowed to come in and to speak to their groups, like Fidelity and Vanguard and T. Rowe Price, like Prudential, all of those firms, UBS, Morgan Stanley, and all of the top leaders of those companies, the women from those companies get this email about porn.
And so I imagine they agreed with it. They're like, these are 4 good alternatives to porn. Dominic is such a well-spoken and smart guy. I'm sure that's what they said.
Yeah. Let's go to the polar opposite of that extreme. I had, you're disgusting. This is horrible. Who do you think you are? One woman, she was a lawyer, just kind of like, I used to follow you. I used to have respect for you. Some of your information was timely, but no self-respecting leadership coach who calls himself a leadership coach teaches people how to watch good porn. I'm pretty sure people can watch porn on their own. This company introduced me to you. If they continue to do work with you, I will remove my firm of 950 members from their firm. Like, it was like, I disassociate myself from Dominic Quartuccio, LLC. Like, that's the kind of stuff I got back, dude.
It's a touchy subject. You picked a good one to blast out to those extra people.
Yeah, it touched a nerve, right?
Touched a nerve.
So, Brian, that was a Monday. By Friday, my entire corporate business had evaporated.
And this was 90% of your revenue at the time.
Yes. Like Monday, the catastrophe, damage control the rest of the week. Friday, I had 0 corporate business.
During that week, so before we got to 0 on Friday,
yeah,
what were you going through? What was damage control like? What were you thinking? I mean, this is the equivalent of being fired, but worse, right? Because it's it's like reputation. It's not like you can go to another financial firm.
Yeah. You know what was really interesting, man? Because of all this inner work that we do and this awareness, and there's some other parts of the story that led up to this week that started to illuminate something bigger was at play. I started to surrender to the belief that something big was happening in my life. Some trajectory shift was happening in my life that was going to be painful, but it was guiding me towards something bigger. I never would have believed in something like that years ago. But there was something about how ridiculous this was, how definitive and decisive it was. Like, I could not ignore it. Like, my business was being flushed down the toilet before my eyes. There was nothing I could do to stop it.
Nothing you could do about it, right. This was a very clear sign.
Very clear. And there was almost something comical about that.
Was it in that week, though? I mean, were you at that point in that week where you're like, well, they're somewhat comical and the universe is telling me something? I mean, it sounds like maybe there was a crisis situation going on that was maybe you got there, but what was the in the moment like?
In the moment, I was doing damage control with so many of my clients who had believed in me, who knew the work that I'd done, like in the men's work world, who knew the topics I spoke about. And they actually stuck their neck out on the line for me, to bring me into these places, as long as kind of the church and state never meet. And I felt bad for them. I had to go in with a number of those people who I'd built relationships with and help them get the egg off their faces. That was the thing I felt most. And the other part, this was weird. There was this certain sense of relief that the fickle paychecks that I was receiving from these companies that also came with a leash and a muzzle were no longer what I was going to tether my future to. Like, I could feel that freedom from that. That happened fast.
So we have some duality here where it's like crisis mode and like I've put other people out and
yes.
I can do what I want.
Yes.
I can do what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah. So again, in this moment, this is where mindfulness and awareness really, really pays its dividends. So Sheryl Sandberg and Adam Grant, 2 great authors. Sheryl Sandberg was the former chief operating officer of Facebook. Adam Grant is one of the best authors on organizational psychology, University of Wharton. He wrote the book Give and Take, something like that. Sheryl Sandberg in 2016 lost her husband to a freak accident, freak death. He was running on a treadmill, had a heart attack, passed out, and then through slamming his head on the treadmill, ended up dying. Sheryl Sandberg was shattered and her kids lost their father. She was an emotional wreck and for months was grieving and felt like that state was going to be permanent. This is the important thing, was this permanence feeling. She thought that she was going to stay in that unhappy, shattered place forever, that her kids were never going to be happy again. And when you're in those Mack Truck moments, picking yourself off the ground of that, whatever that moment is for you, that can feel like it's going to be the case forever. You get swallowed in it, enveloped in it. So she reached out to Adam Grant to help her out of this. What Adam Grant ended up teaching her was that nothing is permanent. That's one of the core tenets of Buddhism. Everything is transient. This too shall pass. And what I felt fully in that entire week's worth of moments was I felt the gravity of the loss, like keynote speeches for tens of thousands of dollars, canceled, canceled, canceled. Corporate workshops, 6 figures, canceled, canceled, canceled. Money that was already in my bank account, come back in, take and send back to them. They don't want you anymore. I felt the pain of all of that. And the feeling of uncertainty and scarcity around where's my future going to be built. I felt all of it. But because I had this deep mindfulness practice, I realized the transient nature of I won't be feeling that forever. And that allowed me to hang in with that at the deepest of levels.
And so you could feel both. And I think this is an important point. It wasn't serial. It wasn't you felt this and then you felt that. I imagine you were feeling both of these.
It was the paradox of like the loss, the pain of the embarrassment, the pain of hurting the people who put their neck out on the line for me, the anger at the emails that I got back from certain people who were just completely triggered and off base and vindictive, feeling all of that. And then this relief of like letting go of this part of my world that felt like I was always muzzling myself and diluting my message, and feeling the sense of freedom to actually go after 100% of this work that we're doing in the world in support of men. I could feel all of that. So that was a lot of feels in a really short period of time.
I know, Dominic, at the beginning of the pandemic, so this was mid-pandemic, if I'm correct, right? A year ago.
Yes, so September 28th. Yeah.
And I know that you had recently transformed your business because of the pandemic, right? You were doing in-person keynotes, and I know there's a lot of work, and you hired a COO. And I know at the beginning of the pandemic, it was like, well, a keynote speech is still going to be a thing. And so you had to transform your business. You continued to pay your employees. And so what about the very real, the very tangible 90% of the revenue is gone? What does that mean for me, Dominic? What does that mean for my business? What does that mean for my employees? How did you deal with that very real thing?
Yeah. I hired a full-time employee with fully loaded benefits, like, 401k, healthcare, all that stuff. Her start date was February 18th of 2020. And then the global pandemic kicks in and we all go into lockdown in March and all the in-person stuff gets canceled. So now all of a sudden, like I have huge fixed costs, all of the business, whatever, goes out the window. I would call that was like a 2x4. The Mack Truck hits in September around Porngate. And I think to answer your question appropriately, like I kind of have to go to what happened on that Saturday after Porngate hits. So Monday is Porngate. I do damage control that whole week. Friday hits, I have no more clients left. And I kind of put a bow on making amends to all the people who stuck their neck out on the line. And so now Saturday, it's the weekend. I finally can come up for air. And I decide to do a mushroom trip. So medicinal mushrooms. So I go into my bedroom and with the intention of exploring, what the fuck was that all about? Like what the fuck was that all about? Because the other thing that I didn't bring into this was that 2 weeks before Porngate, my book launched. And for those of you who have been around for the book, this book was a year in the making. The book launch was an absolute nightmare and unmitigated disaster. So I had pre-sold 2,000 books to On Purpose Leadership, which is a really good job for someone who doesn't have like a book agent, and people were excited about this book. This was the book that, again, was supposed to launch years worth of keynote speeches, years worth of corporate workshops. And what ends up happening the week before the book launch, I get copies of the book delivered from my publisher. And the book has 3 spelling errors on the back, including the word book was missing an O, and it was called This Bach Will Teach You the
the meta irony alone was worth it. Yes.
So this book in our community is referred to as the Bach. The paper quality was garbage. I mean, they got the dimensions of the book wrong. Like everything about the book was a disaster. And I go to my publisher. I'm like, what the fuck is this thing? Got 2,000 copies that are heading out in 1 week. And he was like, oh yeah, there's nothing we can do about it now. And so now I have 2,000 substandard books that I've been working my ass off for the past year with the writing, the marketing, the whatever. And now I'm embarrassed at this thing that's supposed to be a celebration. That happens. And then 2 weeks later, Porngate happens. So I go into this mushroom journey on Saturday with the, like, what the fuck is going on?
What is happening? Why, universe? Yes.
Why? And what ended up happening, this was really cool, man. As soon as I go into this mushroom trip, it took me on a flashback to almost exactly 1 month earlier, August 29th. So that week, it was August 23rd through August 30th, I'd rented a house in Idaho, beautiful house in Idaho, to take like a week for myself to think about what's the future of the business, what's the future of my work and support of the men of this world going to look like. And on August 29th, I remember that date because it was the day before I left. I did this mushroom journey. It was mushrooms mixed with San Pedro. So if you guys don't know San Pedro is a plant medicine from a cactus. And San Pedro is said to be associated with grandfather energy. For those of you who are not familiar with psychedelics, some psychedelics come as unguided medicines. Some unguided medicines are like mushrooms, acid, LSD, MDMA. What it means to be unguided is you're the one, or a therapist is the one who kind of guides you through the medicine. Guided medicines like San Pedro, which has grandfather energy, or ayahuasca that has grandmother energy, you are not the one in charge, right? The grandmother is the one in charge of your ayahuasca experience. You surrender to the grandmother energy. She guides you through the journey, shows you what needs to be seen. San Pedro, similar. It's the grandfather. So what ended up happening on August 29th when I was in Idaho, I had this mushroom San Pedro mix. This message came to me, and it was like this grandfather energy that said, these last few months in the pandemic, where you kind of have really allowed yourself to relax because there wasn't a lot of work, there wasn't a lot of business. I was meditating 2 to 3 hours a day. There wasn't a lot of to happen because the pandemic kind of forced us all to slow down. And the grandfather said to me, you've had a chance to relax, but you've gotten soft. It's time to get down to work again. And I remember feeling this sense of like excitement. And the grandfather said, are you ready? And I said, yes. And when I came back from that trip to Idaho, what I thought was it was time with the book launching and with like new things that I was going to be bringing into the corporate space. I thought it was just time to start working harder. Now I'm on this Saturday, right? The Saturday, October 1st or 2nd, after Porngate had happened. It showed me that what had been triggered in that grandfather experience was a series of events that was wiping out anything that wasn't aligned with the future of my work and the mission that I had set around this 10 million man vision. And it was bulldozing, Mack trucking anything that stood in the way of my focus, of my energy, of my commitment to that massive 10 million man vision. And it was wiping it out, including it sabotaged the book.
With precision.
It was almost like with precision and also with like a nuclear bomb detonation.
Yeah, no regard.
Collateral damage everywhere.
Gentle, right.
It just annihilated me.
So you went on this journey on Saturday. It brought you back a flashback to August where it said, get ready to work. What did that mean to you? Like being able to tie those two things together.
I laughed my ass off.
Okay.
When I could see it from like the meta perspective, I was like, holy shit. And I could feel the grandfather medicine laughing at me. It was almost like he was a prankster. He was like, told you gotten soft, kiddo. And it was kind of like, but you can handle this. And it was his way of like, this is the way that I teach lessons. They're not compassionate, but I can pick you up off the ground after this Mack truck and I'll help dust you off and I'll help show you the way forward.
I know something we talk about a lot on this podcast is purpose, or what am I supposed to do with my life? What am I here for? And it feels like this was a moment to recognize a direction that's being put in front of me. Can you talk a little bit about the clarity that brought?
100%. Again, going back to, we get these messages, right? The feather, the shoulder tap, the 2x4, and then the Mack truck. And in previous periods of my life, I've been run over by the Mack truck, and then I pick my guts up off the ground and I continue to trudge the same path. In this instance, had I been a younger version of myself, a less inner worked version of myself, this business getting evaporated I would have failed to see the guidance that was being placed in front of me of, now that that's gone, you can focus 100% on this 10 million man mission. I would have tried to get back up and then start from zero and start to become a keynote speaker and a corporate person, going back into parts of the financial services world that like I hadn't polluted or contaminated with my Porngate email.
You would have gone back to same path, rebuild mode, and keep on trudging.
Trudge harder. Yep.
And instead, what I'm gathering is you got the opposite, which was that's done and over, and we're moving in a new direction without hesitation.
You're hitting on this really important point, Bryce. Another major lesson I learned around resiliency is listen. Listening and looking for like what actually is happening around you. My Bach had been sabotaged, and the Bach was the thing that was supposed to double me down in the corporate space. When Porngate like undeniably wiped out all of my business, these were two messages to listen to. This is not your path anymore, dude. You have a choice, but really you don't. And you're welcome, because I made it clear for you. Go do this thing. It's going to be uncomfortable for a while. Yes, it maybe happens sooner than you would have liked to. Maybe you don't think you're ready for it, but you are. And go walk that path. And so listening to what's in front of you made it a lot easier for me to swallow that pill.
So you listen. I think that's a really important one, because I know in my life, Mack Truck has come and I got right back to doing really quickly, because it was scary, and doing made me feel like I was doing something about it. So listen was one. Second is you laughed once you recognized the direction.
Yeah.
And then what? Because you have seen, I know I have witnessed an exponential growth in that direction. And I'm curious, after laughing, what did it feel like to have that direction, that clarity?
To hit on this laughter apart again is Adam Grant talks about this with Sheryl Sandberg. After a moment of catastrophe, of grieving or hitting by the Mack truck, there is the time where you need to reclaim joy. With Sheryl Sandberg, losing her husband, she felt guilty to reclaim joy, to bring that back into her life. What do I have to be joyful about? If I'm joyful, then I don't love my husband. Like I'm supposed to be wallowing in my misery. And actually, there is a part of grieving that, you have to feel that pain of loss. But one of the most important parts in healing that grief, in becoming resilient, is actually reclaiming the joy. My laughter allowed me to feel, oh, okay, I'm in control of this. The other big thing that happened in that mushroom journey was I saw myself locked in a fucking cage, a cage that I had been in for decades of my life, around what I was told I could and couldn't say, around what I could and couldn't do, around not ever ruffling anyone's feathers or ever upsetting anybody because of my own perspective. And so I'd always whittled down my voice. I'd always muted my voice. And this Porngate thing, which really pissed off a lot of people, and some of the hate mail that I got back, when I saw that on this mushroom trip, it wasn't like I just opened the door to a cage. It was almost like the Hulk bending the bars of the cage and just pulling them open and shattering them. And these noises, these primal noises on this mushroom trip came out of me like an animal being released from prison. I was snarling, I was growling. I wasn't trying to, it was just coming out of me. And what it allowed me to see was I am no longer shackled to this world of fickle paychecks, like I said before, that come with a leash and a muzzle of what you can and cannot say. And I remember this like claiming of, oh, I am the bad boy now. There is a part of me that is the bad boy. I've always had that inside of me, but like it was never allowed in a Catholic school upbringing or being raised in a certain way of being praised for behaving. There are parts of me that are edgy, that are uncomfortable, that likes to swear on a podcast. And to own that allowed me a sense of freedom. So you ask me, then what? What came to me at the end of that mushroom journey was, I have a final keynote speech on Monday. And as fate would have it, it was with my employer of 15 years, Prudential Financial. The one place that has loved me throughout all of my iterations. The reason why I love Prudential, I was always different. I was always weird. They let me spread my wings when I was there. They hired me when I left. Even when they started to see some of the things that I did in this, like they always brought me back because they believed in me and they saw the totality of me. That Monday, I'd had a keynote speech. It was online. in front of an organization of about like 600 people of associates, a big one. And I had this very technical, prepared speech around beating burnout and all this stuff. It was very scientific. It was very articulate. And it didn't come from my heart. And because that was going to be my decisive last keynote speech in the corporate space. During that mushroom journey, I decided to trash that keynote speech. And on Sunday, I said I was going to write something from the heart. And so when I get on to that webinar, which was the closing keynote of like a full day event, I probably scared the shit out of the conference organizers because I get on and I say, I had this beautifully eloquent, articulate, scientific speech that I'd ran by the conference organizers. We had one of those like prep speeches with like
something a conference organizer never wants to hear. Yes.
And I was like, and I just want you guys to know that I'm actually throwing that out the window because you all deserve something better. I worked with many of you for 15 years, and many of you who have just come through the doors, I know you just from the work we've done together over these last 5. And this is the last speech I'm going to be doing in the corporate space, and you all deserve something better that comes from the heart. Because the one thing that kept me working at Prudential for 15 years was this place had heart. And I'm looking at the names on the screen, and I can see the people and feel the people whose hearts I felt over the course of those 15 years. So the message that I've prepared for you today, I wrote yesterday in just an hour that came and flowed directly from my heart. And I want you to have this. By the end of that speech that day, I had 30 messages that came through email, text message, phone calls. People tracked me down. People who didn't even know me from Prudential tracked me down on like Instagram DMs, Facebook DMs, LinkedIn DMs, all the different platforms that they could find me, telling me that that was the most heartfelt speech that they'd ever heard. And I walked away definitively and decisively on my own terms from that corporate space with a full heart, feeling in complete alignment with who I wanted to be and be seen as going forward. And that was powerful.
There seems to be such a feeling of freedom. You mentioned the Hulk and breaking out and speaking and being the bad boy, and now speaking from the heart, like taking that freedom and saying, I'm going to do this from the heart. So I gather a sense of freedom from you. And also the evidence happened quickly, right? So a week and then a journey on Saturday, wrote the speech on a Sunday, gave it on a Monday, and now feedback comes pouring in. It's amazing how fast that happened.
It is amazing how fast that happened. And now that you're bringing this up, what actually I just remembered is my 6-figure coaching client came from that speech at Prudential. And that happened within a few months. So about 2 months later, I got a phone call from one of the people who were on that call who said, I need something big in my life. And they were moved from the speech that I'd done. And so like, you want to talk about alignment, you want to talk about speed. And I was worried about where that money was going to be replaced from. Like when I was in alignment, when I had learned how to make the proper meaning of it for me to give me sense and clarity and direction, all the things just started to fall into place.
So it's been a year since that moment. Let's talk about some more evidence. So you just mentioned your 6-figure coaching client. What else is going on, and where do you feel some of that clarity?
Great question, man. Now that I look back on it, in this last year, we've launched 2 more masterminds. Mastermind 2.0, the digital mastermind. We have 50 new men who are committing their financial, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual resources to do this inner work. We've launched the Facebook group, over 650 men who are communing from all over the world, sharing stories, lifting each other up. We in our mastermind are starting to have bigger conversations about what do the next 50 years of this work look like? Like, how do we build infrastructure so that men around the world can come and do this? We're about to launch our very first digital retreat, which is going to be happening in December. And that's something that for any of our listeners who have wanted to get a deeper taste and to do this work, that's being built right now over the course of a 3-day weekend in December. So when I look back at what happened in Porngate, was it closed off this part of my world that was distracting me from the thing I wanted to do most, what I was being called to do in this world. It allowed me to reallocate all my time, all my energy into what matters most. And we're becoming a lighthouse for men whose ships are sailing at sea, lost and alone, or looking for a port that they could sail up to and be like, here are my people, finally. So yeah, that's everything that's happened over this past year, man.
The Mack Truck is clear and there's not a lot of choice in it. And as we started this podcast, we said that comes with collateral damage sometimes, and it can often be slower. This last year has felt like you doing your work on speed.
Yeah.
How do you look for these moments now? How do you listen for these moments instead of a porn gate happening? Like, how do you continually realign your ship to the direction that you feel like you should be going?
The question that you asked, Brian, is a really important one, because whereas life will throw us Mack Truck moments, we can also have an influence over how many of those actually happen. I can head off at the pass, a Mack Truck moment, and maybe just respond to the shoulder tap or maybe the 2x4. So here's an example of how that happened for me. Back in April of this year, I went through a difficult breakup with a woman who I'd fallen in love with. It didn't work out. I was also feeling stretched thin around how much I'd taken on, running 2 podcasts a week and creating social media content every day, sending out 2 emails every single week, running 3 masterminds. Those were just the bare minimums of the week, things that had to get done, let alone like anything else that came in on top of that. So instead of allowing myself to continue churning and churning and churning and then burning out and hating what I'm doing, I allowed myself a pause. I allowed myself to stop creating on social media, because that was feeling like too much. I allowed myself to start sending 1 email a week instead of 2. And in its place, I ended up starting the Artist's Way program, which is a book written by Julia Cameron, 12-week program on how to unlock deeper levels of creativity. And basically it involves journaling, morning pages every day, 3 pages of just stream of consciousness writing to get the gunk out of your head and to start listening to some deeper wisdom. And that cracked me open to this whole new level of creativity and depth inside of me that I didn't know existed. The way I used to create, Bri, was I'd wake up in the morning and I'd be like, holy shit, I got a podcast today, or I got an email today, or I got a workshop I got to run tonight. Holy shit, I got to create it, and then I got to deliver it. So my creation was coming from anxiety and stress. And what I realized was that's not where exceptional creativity comes from, at least not for me. Some people maybe. My stuff was good, not exceptional. I want my stuff to come from the deepest place in my soul. So the Artist's Way program allowed me to look at, I actually need more space in my life. I need to stop doing so much so that the stuff that I do can speak louder, which is one of the reasons why we moved this podcast down from 2 a week down to 1. I made a number of adjustments. A month ago, I got back on Instagram, starting to create posts that came from a much deeper place in my heart and from my soul. And over this last week alone, my 2 most popular posts of all time, shattering my previous records. And these are small potatoes for big influencers, but for where I am right now, my most popular post got 500 likes. This past week, I have a post that had over 800 likes and a post that had over 2,200. And I picked up over 500-600 new followers for an account that had less than 5,000 followers. To grow by 10% in 1 week because of what I'm putting out is resonating so deeply. That's meaningful shit. So to your question, man, what I started to hear back then after my breakup was, this isn't working. It was like a 2x4. The way you're living isn't working. And let's stop some stuff so you can pull the slingshot back. So when it's time to let go, whatever you bring forward, shoots forward like a rocket, instead of just some limping out of the starting gates kind of stuff, which was what I was doing.
It sounds like you have this pace or this rhythm of listen, laugh maybe, look for feedback, and it's happening really quickly. So whether it's the 6-figure client or whether it's the likes on Instagram or whatever it may be, it seems like every time you hit this cycle, there's growth that's happening.
Yes.
And from the outside looking in, the reason it looks fast and exponential, it sounds like because those cycles are getting smaller, right? You have your big direction. you're playing between the lanes, you're doing men's worth 10 million men. Like that mission is very clear. And it sounds like you're doing this in smaller moments too, whether it's a breakup or whether it's how do I create better content. And it's exciting.
Yeah.
It's exciting to watch.
Thanks a lot, man. I really appreciate you with the great questions you've asked today to help unpack the story. And I think maybe just to kind of put a bow on it is one of the most important parts of getting up from that Mack Truck moment is being able to find meaning in the situation itself. Viktor Frankl writes about this in A Man's Search for Meaning. When he was incarcerated in the Holocaust, had his whole family exterminated, stripped away from him, 3 years in Auschwitz. He found meaning in that, which was, how can I survive this so I can come back and tell the world about being resilient and hopefully finding my family. He didn't realize his family had been exterminated, but hopefully finding my family and reconnecting with them. He found meaning to wake up every single day. And his life and his teachings have helped tens of millions since his passing. And Adam Grant and Sheryl Sandberg also talked about finding meaning in those catastrophic moments. For me, when Porngate happened, when the Bach happened, on that Saturday when I went into that mushroom journey, what I found was like, oh, this is happening because it needs to wipe out anything that's not in alignment with this 10 million man mission, which I was dead fucking serious about. And so when I was able to see that and like, oh, this is the meaning of it, I was able to laugh. Man, that laughter and knowing that I can laugh in these hardest moments, holy shit, that allows me to take back control of the situation. That feels empowering. So for anyone who's in the midst of a Mack Truck moment, or who's got a Mack Truck moment on the way, or who's still trying to pick their guts up, hopefully this story today provided some guidance, like a lifeline for how to navigate some of those difficult moments in life. Hey, who's got your back when you get hit by the Mack Truck? Do you have a band of brothers that you can call on, like a SWAT team for support? Or are you left picking up your own guts off the pavement? Now, I'm not talking about a group of guys who will take you out, get you drunk, and encourage you to forget about the hardship. I'm talking about being surrounded by a group of mentally, emotionally, and spiritually capable men who know how to turn towards and face and navigate and move through the pain of that hardship. One of the things that Brian and I failed to mention during this interview around my Mack Truck moment was the fact that I was supported by legions of men who are mentally, emotionally, and spiritually trained to help me during those Mack Truck moments. I have my own men's group that I meet with every Monday night for 2 hours. I've got our entire community of the great man within with 3 different masterminds, 650 men in the Facebook group, all of these different groups of men, legions of men there to support me when I needed it most. A lone wolf feels great when he's at his best, but feels weak when he's not. A man who is in community feels great when he's at his best, feels loved and invincible when he's not. Because there's something, guys, about being at your absolute weakest, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and feeling the strength of the men that are around you that you've cultivated deep, trusting, and empowered relationships with. You realize you can face anything in your life. And I am a living, breathing example of that over this past year as I navigated one of the biggest Mack Truck moments and most difficult transitions of my life. Now, you may know what it's like to go through a Mack Truck moment as a lone wolf. Shit, you may have gone through something like this months ago, years ago, decades ago, and you're still suffering the side effects of that. The behavior in your life, how you're showing up in your life is still affected by that moment because you did it on your own. If you're tired of that shit, of dealing with it on your own, of dealing with the lingering side effects that could be months, years, decades, or even a lifetime in the making, then now is the time to step forward and stop lone wolfing and join one of our communities. In the show notes, I'm going to put a link, an email address, hello@DominicQ, to reach out and inquire about joining the digital mastermind. If it's time for you to stop lone wolfing, if you want to learn how to build warrior level resiliency, it can't be done on your own. It needs to be done in the support of a group of other guys who are training to do the same. So reach out, hello@DominicQ. And I always say this, half-assed inquiries will be ignored. If you're going to reach out and you're going to write to us, we want to feel you. Let me know what it is that moved you about this episode. What's going on in your life? What do you want for yourself? Let me feel you. hello@DominicQ.com. Stop lone wolfing your life.